Early this summer, 3 American doctors, all cardiologists, and 3 Soviet medical officials met in a Moscow studio to talk about nuclear war. The result was a unique TV program that the Russians say was seen by more than 200 million people. Reports on the horrors of nuclear weapons, especially American weapons, are not unusual in the Soviet media. What was different in this case, though, and what was fascinating to Soviet viewers, was who was doing the talking. Americans have rarely been allowed to speak on Soviet TV at such length, unedited, and on such an important subject. Gaining Soviet airtime is the most dramatic achievement of a group called the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Less than 2 years old, the group claims 30,000 members from over 30 countries and has held conferences in the United States and England about the probable effects of a nuclear war. The idea of a Russian TV show came up at last spring's conference during a discussion between the group's 2 co-chairmen, Harvard cardiologist Bernard Lown and Soviet academician Evgeny Chazov, President Brezhnev's personal physician. With encouragement from the Soviet ambassador in Washington, Anatoly Dobrinin, Dr. Lown's group proposed the program to the Soviet State Committee on TV and Radio. Dr. Lown selected the 2 other Americans, fellow Harvard professor James Muller, who once studied in Moscow, and Dr. John Pastore of the Tufts Medical School. For the Soviet side, Dr. Chazov chose Mikhail Kuzin, vice president of the Soviet National Surgical Society, and Leonid Ilyin, director of the Institute of Biophysics of the Soviet Ministry of Health. The original title was For the Prevention of Nuclear War, a roundtable with Soviet and American physicians. Here's the program.
Уважаемые телезрители,
Dear television viewers, today television gives us the opportunity, as Soviet and American scientists and physicians united in the movement, the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War, to tell you openly and honestly about the goals of our movement. The basic purpose of this movement is the preservation of life on Earth. We must work to preserve life because nuclear weapons have accumulated on a gigantic scale, and the threat of a nuclear holocaust becomes more and more evident.
Dear Bernard, maybe you introduce some words about our movement, about your opinion.
Yes.
Okay.
My colleagues and I are privileged and delighted to be able to address the people of the Soviet Union in this completely uncensored and unrehearsed television broadcast. Among the 6 of us sitting around this table, there's grown a deep bond of enduring friendship because we know that we need each other to help contribute to the prevention of death and destruction of our families, our children, our culture, our country, the very civilization of our little planet, everything that a human being holds dear.
I have one question. In Russian, yes. Я бы хотел сказать.
I want to remark that, as you know, it was our desire to protect life on Earth that brought us, people of different nationalities, of different political and religious views, together in this movement. Yet it is probable that we came to this point by different routes. When nuclear war is mentioned, we always recall Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because it was the first test of nuclear arms and the first terrifying experience of their use. I know that Professor Pastore has studied this problem, and I think that he will agree to tell us how he came to our movement and what brought him to us.
Thank you very much. You're right. I became involved with this movement through interest that was sparked by the work that I did with the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. We have a short film which is relevant to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki experience, and if we could begin to see that now, I'll explain what happened there. This picture of Hiroshima after the bombing, taken only a few days later, shows the tremendous devastation of the entire city in spite of the fact that it was only one bomb. There were all buildings and department stores previously standing in that place before then. If if one looks closely, you might even see an occasional person walking along the street, but it was utter devastation. These shadows left on the street were left, this one by a person who was standing there, was vaporized when the bomb exploded. The medical capability was almost entirely destroyed in both cities. About 80% of the doctors and nurses were killed immediately, and the hospitals that were left over were very primitive, and the doctors themselves were sick as patients. And I think in our movement, this has been one of our main themes, and that is that there can be no reasonable medical response to a nuclear war.
I think that it is very important to understand that the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are nothing compared to what may happen to mankind today. I believe that one of the tasks of our movement is to investigate, on the basis of accurate scientific data, the possible medical consequences of such a war. I think that academician Ilyin has specifically studied such problems with a group from our movement. So I think we will ask Leonid Andreevich Ilyin to give us the facts they have discovered and to give us his impressions and scientific data related to this problem.
Спасибо, Евгений Иванович. Ну, я хотел бы сразу подчеркнуть.
Thank you, Evgeny Ivanovich. Well, I would like to stress immediately that the doctrine of so-called limited nuclear war, I'm profoundly convinced, is nothing but an insult to common sense. Indeed, the logic of a modern military conflict with the use of a nuclear and thermonuclear weapons is such that a limited nuclear war, no matter where it began, would inevitably and immediately become a global thermonuclear holocaust.
We like to say that thinking of a limited nuclear war is like thinking that the top third of a keg of dynamite will explode, only the top third. It's impossible. It will be a complete, total nuclear war.
Yes, I agree with you. Знаете, я хотел бы сказать, что...
I would like to say that there is among us here one individual who has a very unusual history. None of us here has seen all of the horrors of war which he has seen. Mikhail Ilyich lived through 3 wars. He can tell us his impression about what medicine might offer in these conditions based on his past experience.
Спасибо. Для того, чтобы говорить о медицинской помощи во время любой...
Thank you. To discuss the possibilities of medical assistance during any war, we must consider the number of casualties and the available means, the number of medical personnel, the availability of drugs, hospitals, beds, etc. In Europe alone, we would have 150 million casualties requiring medical assistance. It is beyond our imagination. The intelligence of a physician, the intelligence of any person cannot embrace the fact that during several days, or even during one day alone, there would be such an enormous number of casualties requiring medical attention. And in most cases, such assistance, you would agree, Bernie, as a cardiologist and an expert in sudden death, would be limited to the most primitive level, like bandaging and the like. It would be difficult to provide assistance in the scope provided in peacetime. You see, about 20% of the casualties would have wounds and burns requiring anti-shock therapy, blood transfusions, blood substitutes, or antibiotics.
A number of years ago, we made an analysis of a nuclear attack against Boston. Out of 2,875,000 people, 1 million were killed outright, 1 million were fatally injured, and 500,000 were injured and survived. But of doctors, of the 6,500 doctors, only 10% remained alive. And then we figured out if a doctor spent 10 minutes with each patient, which is, of course, an absurd assumption, he would be able to see the first patient again in 12 to 14 days, assuming he worked 20 hours a day.
Bernie,
Yeah.
I think that we have some question different fields. It is problem, psychology problem, and problem mistake. Ведь война может начаться не только от...
You see, it is not only evil motivation which could start the war. And I know, Jim, that you have such information that a simple psychological, technical miscalculation could cause all the horrors we are talking about. It is difficult to imagine, especially for television audiences in our countries. And it may be that many of them do not even understand what could happen. But you know. Would you tell us about it?
Yeah, I would like to talk about it because I think most people, when they think of the horrors that we've been discussing, have a tendency to say it will never happen. No one will push the button. And I think there is an extremely important way that a nuclear war could start, a very likely way that we need to talk about, and that we have some medical reasons for thinking it might happen. That is an accidental nuclear war. I think the risk of an accident is getting higher every day, and it gets higher for three reasons. One is these weapons are spreading to other countries, and other countries that may not be as used to working with computers, may not have as good a control, so that's one, the spread to other countries. Two, the counterforce, the development of aiming nuclear weapons at other nuclear weapons, shortens the time to decide if something crazy on the computer is a mistake or is it a really attack. So the time to solve these accidental problems is decreasing. And finally, every new nuclear weapon we build adds one more weapon that can go wrong. It adds another crew in a silo that can have trouble. So the world is moving towards a higher and higher chance of an accidental nuclear war.
I want to say a thing that is a little break in our discussion, and that is there's been much controversy about civil defense. And civil defense requires a lot of investment of resources. Civil defense, I'm talking only of nuclear war. And initially, we talked of shelter programs. But it's clear that shelter programs in targeted areas will become crematoria, with the exhaustion of oxygen from firestorms and the accumulation of noxious gases. So the next policy is let's evacuate populations. But evacuating populations is insane. It makes an assumption that we know where the bombs are going to fall. It makes an assumption that we know what their size is. It makes an assumption about weather conditions. It makes an assumption about the wind, which will carry radiation.
Will the people evacuate?
And will the people evacuate? But furthermore, there are negative aspects. And the negative aspects is that it fosters a sense of hope for people, that somehow there is safety in this type of measure. And lastly, it becomes a factor to promote nuclear war. You know why?
There can be no winner in a nuclear war. And nuclear war means death to all human beings. Today, the nuclear arms race has become a heavy burden for mankind, for medicine too. If all the money being spent today on missiles, submarines, and aircrafts were used for medical purposes, just think how much good we could be doing for the health of the people of the world. I have broadcast some of the calculations on Soviet television on several occasions. A mere 10% of the military budget would be enough to feed the hungry people of the world.
Do you know,
Yes.
the head of the United Nations, Perez de Cuellar,
Yes.
told us in a meeting recently
Yes, I
that
know
every day 40,000 children die of hunger. Every day.
And every minute,
Yes.
the world spends $1 million
$1 million
on weapons.
on weapons.
And in terms of medical diseases that have been essentially eradicated already, smallpox was eradicated essentially from the face of the earth at a cost which is equivalent to 5 hours of the arms race.
Well, I think it is quite clear. I think any rational person understands that if the money spent today on the nuclear arms race were spent for education, medicine, culture, then mankind would be prospering.
In the first letter that you wrote me, in October of 1979, you sort of jolted me because I was talking of the danger of nuclear war. You said, but look, Bernard, nuclear war is already claiming victims. The preparation of it is already claiming victims by the denial. 250 million people have no housing in the world today, and 2 billion have no access to sanitary water, which is the cause of 80% of all the illnesses in the world.
I remembered.
Yeah.
Я вспоминаю, ты мне сказал...
You can speak English, I don't mind.
I speak not only for
Yeah,
you,
I know
but
that,
for
I know
people. Ты мне сказал, что...
You told me that when you arrived in Moscow, you decided to find out if our movement was well known in the Soviet Union. So you asked a taxi driver if he had heard about this movement.
3 out of 4 taxi drivers in Moscow have heard of the IPPNW.
Ну, вот, видишь, так что я думаю, ну...
Yes, so you see, it is not difficult for me to appear on television here to tell people that we must work for nuclear disarmament, because our nation has suffered war and knows its horrors. Our people perceive our ideas very clearly. I think that our program today, which I am certain will be seen by millions of people in our country, is in keeping with their interest and with the struggle against nuclear weapons, against nuclear war.
You know, when one is at the brink, when one is at the edge of an abyss, progress is not taking one step forward, progress is stopping and then going back. And we physicians at Cambridge said that the first step of the nuclear powers must be to cease all production, testing, and deployment of nuclear weapons and their delivery systems. This should be accompanied, yes, this should be accompanied by mutually acceptable methods of verification. We all of us agreed on that. And I believe that we physicians must urge this, because this is the only sensible position now possible in the world today.
Дорогие друзья, ну, мы решили...
Dear friends, we have decided to conclude our discussion with the appeal of American physicians to our Soviet people and with the appeal of Soviet scientists and physicians to the American people. Jim knows. He knows Russian well.
Jim, you studied at the first Moscow Medical Institute, and it is my guess that you can speak Russian.
I will try. Excuse my mistakes.
Да.
У меня была возможность жить и работать в Советском Союзе.
I've had the opportunity to live and work in the Soviet Union through scientific exchanges. Today, I'd like to tell you about the thoughts of those of us who live on the other side of the nuclear abyss. I studied the Russian language shortly after Sputnik. In 1967, I was a student in the first Moscow Medical School. Dr. Kuzin, then a famous surgeon, was the dean of the school. By chance, Dr. Kuzin, together with Drs. Chazov and Ilyin, became a founder of the group of Soviet physicians for the prevention of nuclear war. In 1975, Harvard Medical School sent me to Moscow to conduct joint research with Dr. Chazov in the area of new methods of treatment of cardiovascular disease. I came to Moscow with my family. My children had the opportunity to attend kindergarten with Soviet children. From this, I know how the Soviet people suffered in war. Among the students who were my friends in Moscow, there had been a death in every family. In Leningrad, I visited a mass grave for those who died from starvation during the blockade. The vision of pieces of bread left on the tombstone is etched in my memory. I also know that the horror of war is not just a memory in the Soviet Union. There is a persistent and even more horrifying threat of nuclear war that presently concerns the Soviet people. This concern is intensely felt as we sit in this Moscow studio with the nuclear weapons of at least 4 nations targeted upon us. We Americans also feel the threat of nuclear war. We put our children to bed each night with the knowledge that nuclear weapons threaten each tomorrow. In my nephew's school in Detroit, 75% of the students report that the threat of nuclear war clouds their future. In New York, on June 12th, there was an enormous demonstration for nuclear disarmament, as we already discussed, in which over 700,000 Americans participated. So in both East and West, we live in fear and watch with darkest pessimism as the world moves inexorably toward nuclear war. Must this be our fate? Or do forces exist which can give our children the chance to live and their children the chance to be born. Today I am optimistic because I believe such forces do exist. The very growth of technology, which has so abruptly presented to humanity the possibility of extinction, has also given us a powerful tool for survival. Scientific and technical progress has led to a massive system for exchange of ideas among people of all countries. This can facilitate a positive change in consciousness, a change needed for survival. The Soviet and American people bear a special responsibility for resolution of the threat of nuclear war. Fortunately, we've already demonstrated an ability to work together for the common good. Dr. Lown, Dr. Pastore, and I are here for the World Congress of Cardiology, in which physicians from many countries work together against the common threat of heart disease. The friendship of Dr. Chazov and Dr. Lown, two of the world's leading cardiologists, led to the formation of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. 40 years ago, Americans and Soviets worked together against Hitler. We must now join together against the far greater threat of nuclear war. The struggle is much more difficult than the struggle against Nazism. We must now work against the accumulation of destructive force, which in limited quantity once brought security, but now in unlimited nuclear quantities brings only insecurity. Nuclear weapons have shattered forever the relationship between destructive force and national security. We who populate this planet at this moment have a solemn obligation to all past and future generations. We must work to strengthen the ties between East and West, which are now weak and limited, and build these ties on a humanitarian basis. In such a manner, we can diminish our common danger. We must remember that human beings can not only destroy, but can live with kindness and love and friendship and peace. Let us together affirm these aspects of our nature. Let us together continue life on this small planet.
Thank you very much. It is a good speech. If possible, yes.
Спасибо.
To the people of the United States, we, American and Soviet physicians, are united by our concern for the future of peace on Earth, for life on our planet. Nuclear weapons can lead to a nuclear war simply because they exist. That is why all the people of the globe, irrespective of their nationality, religion, or political views, should raise their voice against the nuclear arms race, against the plans of use nuclear weapons, and against the very thought of the nuclear war. Nuclear weapons should be outlawed, their production stopped, and their stockpiles destroyed. We address this message to you with the belief that the reason will prevail. Thank you very much, dear friends. Спасибо большое.
Thank you, television viewers. We hope that our work will bring positive results.
Положительные результаты. Thank you very much.
This is a great occasion.
Videotape and film of the Moscow telecast is owned and was made available by the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War.
Jim, I think that it was beautiful speech. Yes, your speech was beautiful.
He had the input of every Russian that he encountered.
You know the дежурная,
Thank you.
дежурная в гостинице, она помогала мне на произношении.
If you would like a transcript of this broadcast, please send a check for $3 to PTV Publications, Post Office Box 701, Kent, Ohio 44240. This program was made possible by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.